Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare.
We're good to go. Okay, we're in this incredible text that was compiled by Bhikshuni Thubten Chodron with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in consultation with an incredible amount of geshes. And the goal of this text, this series, is to present the stages of the path to enlightenment, to a Western mindset. So the first volume that we've been covering is some clarification around words and views and perspectives that, from a Buddhist perspective, may conflict a bit with how we think of things with our Western education. And right now we're at a piece in the book where we're working with emotions, destructive or helpful, and how they relate in this category of afflictions. So afflictions are anything that obscure the mind or afflict the mind in a way that takes us out of our natural state, out of our sense of well-being. So affliction's a big category, and within afflictions can be these emotions that can be very afflictive. But also an affliction can be a misperception, a misunderstanding of self, because it obscures me recognizing my true nature and the experience that we're having. So even misperception is an affliction. So that got covered up a couple weeks ago, and now we are engaging in four types of afflictions that can be very troublesome. Last week was attachment, and a lot of people, just have a big misperception around attachment. The second noble truth, cause of all suffering, attachment. And then they're like, well, it's not exactly that. There are healthy forms of attachment, healthy forms of desire. And that's a rich discussion we had last week. For example, a desire to have your children be healthy and well, your neighbors to be taken care of, some desire to be of benefit to others. These can be very healthy. And in not an exaggerated way or an extreme, can be really beneficial. The desire to engage in a meaningful life, very, very helpful. But of course, we can get pretty attached thinking, I need things to be like this or like that. And then, the stress, we're in the fear around things not being like this or that. And from that, self-centeredness, greed, all the other afflictive states can arise. So misunderstood affliction of attachment is one of the root issues in the whole prison of samsara. But there are healthier forms of it. So I think we had a good discussion of that last week after I eventually woke up and was able to speak semi-coherently. Now we're dabbling into fear. But before we go to fear, I had a conversation with Mark this morning. Just attachment's sneaky, very sneaky. I was thinking we had an assignment back in another teaching around attachment. And I noticed that I can be a bit attached to a coffee cup. Like, I have a whole cupboard full of coffee cups. I don't think I need another coffee cup. But when I come down in the morning, like if this one's clean or that one's clean, I'll take that one. I'll take that cup. And there's some other cups that I'm not that interested in drinking out of. And so one week we had the assignment of inviting people to drink out of the coffee cup that they don't particularly would pick, that isn't fun. And it was kind of fun to see what came up. It was a little bit difficult for some people to pick the one that, it's just a cup. It's just a cup. You put fluid in it, you drink out of it. If you didn't have any cup, it'd be great. But when you have a bunch of them, drinking out of that other one can be interesting to watch what happens with the mind, the preferences that we have in very subtle levels. In my particular case, I have a cup that is a grandparent cup. My daughters, got that for me, and so I have a warmth around that cup. But I don't particularly like drinking out of the cup. It's not the one I picked to drink out, but I kind of like it. So it's interesting. Even that's a different form of attachment. I like that one, but I don't typically pick to drink it. I pick another one. And so here you could see that in very subtle ways, our mind is clinging to this, and I like that, and I don't like that, and watching, how can that get in the way sometimes of our gratitude, our contentment, our just way of being. So just a little piece I wanted to throw up there on attachment. And anyone wants to drink out of a coffee cup you don't like, see what happens. Okay, we'll get into the next one, which is fear. Pop up the text here. I think I can. There we go. Okay. Fear is another emotion that can be spoken of in two ways. In common parlance, fear is usually associated with panic, anxiety, worry, and distress. It is considered a negative emotion because it feels so unpleasant and is often based on unrealistic thinking. From a Buddhist viewpoint, this kind of fear is afflictive because it is based on exaggeration and self-preoccupation. And it leads a person to engage in actions or make decisions that are unwise. So I think in our culture, fear causes a lot of problems, and there's different acronyms for fear that people come up with. One that I like to use a lot is false evidence appearing real fear. Get pretty worked up over things that aren't that big a deal. What's that? There's something like face everything and recovers is one, so different ways that people look at fear and how we work with fear. One thing that I think is valuable before we even go into this other piece is teaching from Tenzin Priyadarshi. I really appreciated what he said about fearlessness. Fearlessness being not the absence of fear, but acknowledging that you have some fear and not succumbing to it. In other words, feeling the fear, but still making the healthy choice anyway, still doing the thing, feeling uncomfortable, showing up anyway, which I think is a really wonderful understanding of fearlessness. Meaning, yeah, I'm experiencing some fear, some anxiety, whatever's happening, but I'm still going to show up in a way that's healthy and meaningful. I won't succumb to it. I won't let it dictate my actions. And so we can see, I think all of us probably have an afflictive experience of fear quite frequently. We get worked up over things. We get anxious about things. We might have some insecurity about ourselves. Fear, there's a trajectory of fear. It's not just panic, as they put here, worry, distress. How about, a little anxiety, a little insecurity, that's a fear. It's a very subtle form. And then we get into, just petrified, right? Paralyzed. With that spectrum of fear goes from very subtle to very strong and can be quite paralyzing. And in that case, very unhealthy. But not all fears unproductive. So another kind of fear has an element of wisdom. It is an awareness of possible danger that causes us to exercise caution. So here's where I think fear gets a bad rap. Sometimes fear is really helpful, really helpful. So while this fear sometimes feels unpleasant, it is useful and is free from the emotional torment of ordinary fear. For example, awareness that you live in an area that is prone to earthquakes encourages people to make heed of building codes to protect buildings from collapsing, right? Healthy sense of fear. This could happen. I'm going to take some productive steps. People lay careful plans, take precautions without being immersed in uncontrollable panic. I think of fear in one real tangible way. Like if I'm like on a narrow trail on a cliff, fear keeps me focused. I'm watching where I put my feet. It just helps really direct my attention. This wisdom fear is also at work when we merge onto a highway. Aware of the danger of other vehicles, driving at high speeds, we drive carefully. Parents instill in young children a respectful fear of matches. In the above examples, fear is useful and not afflictive. So again, all of these emotions, I don't think we're going to have a big distinction between a Buddhist view and Western sort of educational view, other than I think we may exaggerate our fears in an unhealthy way and kind of think that's a little more okay. Whereas from a Buddhist perspective, it's really afflictive if its underpinnings are based in a misperception. But most of this will be pretty much in alignment to just how things are. The difference between, so fear can be useful, not afflictive. The difference, there we go, between afflictive fear and wisdom fear is the presence or absence of exaggeration. So this elaborative quality, how we get worked up about it. When we are attuned to facts of the situation, fear is not distorted, but when we exaggerate some aspect of the situation, fear is unrealistic and leads to suffering. But here we cut right to a Buddhist main point. The more that we can live in reality, the less mental emotional suffering. Like these mental emotional afflictions are arising from misunderstanding. So right here, if we're not exaggerating, if we're grounded, if we're engaging in life more accurately, not going to be afflictive. Now they're going to bring up some interesting things, one of which I'd never quite heard of and I don't understand. So, but we'll go there anyway. Certain meditation on stages of the path are designed to arouse wisdom fear in us. So stages of the path is this text, stages of the path to awakening. It's the full organization of Buddhist teachings, literally from how to set up an altar to awakening, to full enlightenment. It has everything in it. And there are certain meditations that you do at each point and where you're at in that path. And some of them are trying to arouse a bit of fear in you, but in a healthy way, not in a paralyzing way, just in a sense of urgency. So when we meditate on the disadvantages of cyclic existence, the disadvantage of samsara, wisdom fear motivates us to practice the path to liberate ourselves from samsaric suffering. So we might get stuck here forever if we don't do something a little more productive. The meditation on death is meant to provoke not an emotional, panicky fear of death, which is of no benefit at all, but a wise awareness of our mortality that leads us to set good priorities in our life, abandon harmful actions, and live ethically and kindly. So here, pretty a healthy sense of fear. I might die today. But that's nothing to stress over. It's like, how am I using my life? Maybe I'm fearing wasting my life. I'm fearing how I engage with others. might be less prone to go to sleep at night without saying I'm sorry. You know, one of the things that helps me personally with this, when I'm mindful of it, is to know that each interaction I have with someone might be our last. And for me, that has helped me be a lot less of a jerk and a lot more patient. You know, I got a call today from a few people, and I'm trying to catch up on work, and the difference today is I answer the phone and I talk to people and I check in and how are you doing, and whereas before it would have been okay, what's the point? Got stuff to do, and I just noticed today that in the midst of it, what a gift it was to so how are you doing, what's going on, and because once I hang up that phone, I don't know that I'll ever get that call again. And what's really important, all the work to get done, or that interaction, if it's our last interaction. So that would be an example of a wise awareness of fear, and in a healthy way. It's productive. Some people, though, when we do meditations on death, they're going to get pretty fearful about it and can create a lot of anxiety. And so they, I think they're going to address it here in a bit, so I won't talk too much about that. This is the part I found interesting, I didn't know about. In Thailand, some monks from the forest tradition meditate in fearful places such as cemeteries, jungles, and forests with ferocious animals like tigers and stuff. I mean, I got the cremation ground stuff, but meditating around at tigers and stuff, it's tricky. Before 1959, when Tibetans had to really escape from the Chinese invasion and occupation, meditators in Tibet did the same thing. They did the same thing. If panicky fear arose in their minds, motivated by the suffering that such fear produces, they would make a strong effort to generate samadhi or wisdom realizing emptiness in order to overcome it. So I guess somehow here, if you're meditating around tigers or ferocious animals and you get panicky, you're going to be able to really focus more on that state of samadhi. So I'm not sure how that works. That's a new thing to me. Ajahn Mun, a famous ascetic Thai monk who lived in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and his disciples practiced in this way. And there are many stories of them entering deep states of samadhi when encountering a tiger in the jungle. The great Tibetan yogi Milarepa practiced similarly, and meditators in the Chud lineage deliberately invoke spirits and ghosts to spur them to generate deep bodhicitta and wisdom. Yeah. Interesting story. So I don't know if it relates to being around the tigers and stuff. But one of our teachers, Alan Wallace, he's up here at the top. One of his teachers had other students, and one of the students was a great practitioner of meditation and go off and live in these huts. And he actually had cobras where he was at. And like cobras were in the little hut. And his teacher was concerned about him, went and checked up on him, make sure, you have all these cobras. And basically he said, they're not a problem if you're calm and if you move slowly. And it helps me be mindful. And so he slept and had cobras around. And but I guess he also had probably a great sense of metta, loving kindness as well. But he said, you don't want to sit on one, and so I had to be really mindful. So I wonder if maybe you're around a tiger like that. Who knows? if someone meditates on the sufferings of the lower realms and panicky fear instead of wisdom fear arises, so again around death meditations, what should they do? First, they should remind, this is she and herself, but remember, I try to remind people, I try to speak in a different pronoun to be inclusive of everyone. First, they should remind themselves that panic is not the desired outcome of meditation. So in case you ever get panicky or fearful, just remind yourself, that's not why we meditate. I love how it's just a quick, that's all. Then realize that they have the ability to avoid the causes for such a rebirth. They should turn their mind to the three jewels, take refuge in them, instead of allowing themselves to be overwhelmed by this unrealistic fear. A well-trained practitioner will use it to reaffirm their connection to the three jewels. So again, meditations on death, anxiety, fear around that, panic, not helpful. And so it's important to take some steps to find some ease with that. And recognize that you're doing this so that you don't have to have such exaggerated fears. Some scriptures speak of using the presence or absence of panicky fear as a way to examine whether or not a person is an arhat. An arhat's a realized being who has attained nirvana. So it's a good, quick way to check. I guess you sneak up on them, slap your hands by the ears, see if they flinch. When a person is meditating or sitting casually, someone makes a sudden, sharp, loud sound. If that person does not jump or gasp with fear, it is said that they have attained high levels of the path. They're pretty well advanced. According to this example, it seems that some level of self-grasping is present when an ordinary person experiences fear, but is absent when they are liberated from cyclic existence. And I'm just going to pause there. I've been going for a little bit. Check in with those of you online and those of you here. Actually, it looks like we just have one more paragraph. One more paragraph. Sometimes it is said that bodhisattvas fear samsara as well as the personal peace of an arhat's nirvana. While the word fear is used to indicate their unwillingness to stay in either of these states, it is not the fear we ordinary people experience. So just to be clear on this, a bodhisattva is someone who has dedicated their whole life to freeing all beings of suffering. That they are achieving awakening so they can be in a better position to help all beings be free of suffering. So they're not just achieving nirvana, they're actually motivated to achieve an enlightened state as a Buddha and then continually work to get everyone free. So that's a bodhisattva path. And it says here that the word fear is used that they don't want to remain in samsara. Well, it's not like they're afraid of it. It's that they'll fear that they can't really help others. They're motivated to be free of samsara so they can be helpful. Nor do they want to stay in nirvana. So there's, within the bodhisattva path, one of the things that they fear is being stuck in a state of nirvana. Like you get liberated, you're free, and it's so good that you give up thinking about it, helping others. And so they don't want to get stuck there. So they really taper the process of nirvana, taper down the sort of value of it. Of course, it's valuable, but they have a bigger drive to help all beings. So they don't want to stay just there in that state. So in this case, even though they use the word fear, the fear of being stuck in samsara, the fear of being stuck in nirvana, it's really just a sense that it will limit their ability to help everyone. And so they're really motivated to not get complacent. So that's a healthy thing. Our fear is usually based on self-grasping and self-centeredness, while Bodhisattva's fear is underlain with compassion and wisdom that wants to attain Buddhahood in order to benefit others as soon as they can. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, check in with people and see what may or may not be coming up as we engage in this discussion on fear. Please, yes.
What are the 3 jewels?
Yeah, so the 3 jewels of refuge would be the Buddha. So the Buddha that gave the teachings, but there's actually multiple Buddhas. We just know the historical one. And the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and the Sangha, which would be these awakened practitioners that have awakened to Buddhahood. So we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So it's often as the doctor, right? We have these afflictive states, the medicines, the Dharma, and then the Sangha is often like the healthcare organizations, the people that work to help us free ourselves from our afflicted states. So those are the 3 jewels of refuge. Often we'll talk about Sangha like we're a Sangha, but that's not what you would take refuge in. You'd want the Sangha of sort of that have already attained some realization. They're going to be a lot more dependable than me, for example. And, so the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha would be the 3 jewels to really take a refuge in. Good question. Thank you. Anybody else? And there's always curiosity, as I can usually. Anybody have any unhealthy fear ever pop up?
Never.
Never.
No.
Fearless, man. Yeah, so some things to play with fear in this sense is this moving me towards a healthy response? And so I think that's a thing to really play with, where a lot of people think they shouldn't have any anxiety or any sense of insecurity or, sense of fear. That often can move us in a very healthy direction. And I think that's the underlying point here. Isn't the fear itself, but what's my response to it, right? What's my response? And so if it's moving me in a healthier, more clear direction, it's not afflictive at all. It's actually beneficial. So I think there's a lot of times that we've had some fears in our lives that have moved us in a healthy direction that we may have not wanted any part of. What's the old Circle Day show? Like, my comfort zone's here, growth is out here, right? And so there's a lot of potential for fear to move us in a really healthy direction. If I keep sticking with just what's comfortable, it's going to be pretty hard to grow.
The very last sentence that you read,
Mm-hmm.
could you read it one more time?
Yeah, pop it right up. So it's about bodhisattvas.
Yeah.
And it said, while our fear is usually based on self-grasping and self-centeredness, while bodhisattva's fear is underlain with compassion and wisdom that wants to attain Buddhahood in order to benefit others.
I'm kind of curious what is happening. I think Yogananda asked Ramana Maharshi about, how you can truly help the world, and his answer was an unequivocal self-realization. If you don't know who and what you are, you can't really help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, I don't really understand this bodhisattva business.
Well, it fit exactly.
From the standpoint of what Ramana Maharshi was stating.
Mm-hmm. It's actually the same answer. A bodhisattva, or is seeking to attain Buddhahood, but actually, you are already a Buddha, right? You already have Buddha nature. So if you don't know who you are, you don't know you're a Buddha. And so the whole path of Buddhism is to remove the obscurations that prevent you from knowing your true nature.
But to stop before a final enlightenment? Is that what
I'm
what I
sorry.
was hearing? To stop just short?
No. You want full enlightenment. Bodhisattva is there to have full enlightenment so they can be much more helpful.
Okay.
So a bodhisattva, Buddha, full Buddha, is going to be much more helpful. And so, but the distinction would be between an arhat. I think that's what we're talking about. So an arhat's attain nirvana. They're free of samsara. And so the best description I have is Bhikkhu Bodhi, who talks about these, that the Buddhas taught how to be free of suffering.
Yeah.
He taught how to attain nirvana and how to become an arhat. And then some later practitioners with the Bodhisattva path said, what would it be like to be a Buddha? Buddha is fully enlightened beyond all that. So a Bodhisattva is to become a Buddha. An arhat is to attain nirvana. And so the Bodhisattvas are trying to take a step beyond that.
Got you. So nirvana perhaps being a temporary experience that might come and go, and Buddhahood meaning...
No, nirvana would be pretty... You could be there, like you're free. So if you attain nirvana, and not a taste of it, but you're totally free. You're free of samsara. You're free of cyclic existence. You're free of karma. You can attain nirvana to that degree. And it's not some place. I just recognize who I am. I experience everything differently. But there's still what we'd call some subtle light obscurations. They're very subtle. It's kind of like like if you've gotten, you cook something, and like we're cooking soup at home right now with some garlic. And we've taken the soup, it's all gone, right? So all those afflictions are gone, but the smell of garlic is still there, right? So that's kind of the analogy would be an arhat. There's still a very thin light, a few obscurations, which are different than a Buddha would have, a full Buddha. And so a bodhisattva is seeking to ask not the question so much of how can I be free of suffering, but rather how can I become a Buddha, a full Buddha, and for the benefit of all others. And that's their motivation. And it's imbued in every single thing they do, that from the moment you wake up, you are seeking to benefit all sentient beings and to engage in practices that help you recognize your ultimate nature, so you can do that to the best of your ability to know who you are. Because the primary problem is we identify me and mine with that which is not me and mine. So it would fit right in with that answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a good question. And anyone that stops me from having to just talk a lot, I appreciate dialogue. Okay, anyone else out there online? Or we have a bit of time. We can dig into anger.
You've got two hands up. What do you do?
Well, if you, instead of a hand, oh, I see. I don't have your participatory things here. Sorry about that. Do we have hands up or just unmute yourself? I don't see a hand on the side. Okay.
Hey, John.
Yes.
So when my kids are in Laramie and they're driving to Seattle in the winter through a snowstorm, how does that fear? I mean, how do I work? Is that fear I mean, I feel fear for them, right? Is that afflictive fear? I mean, I'm wanting their well-being.
Right.
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 But if I'm not careful, I can get to where I get wrapped around the axle pretty tight, around their driving.
Yeah. And so that's where we move into the criteria. A normal, healthy concern, wanting your children to be safe, healthy, right? But now what am I doing? Is it taking me away? Is there something I can directly do or not do right now? Can I, maybe have a phone near me in case they get in an accident and, I'm reachable? versus can I not think about anything else except that, as you say, wrapped around the axle. And so can I hold an awareness of their journey without getting wrapped around the axle, and take some steps that are healthy and productive, like I say, making sure that we stay in touch, that they check in when they get where they're going, and follow up if they don't. But that it's not preoccupying my whole day and causing me to, not really engage in my activities in healthy ways. Does that make sense, sir?
Yeah, I just find myself, the only way I have been able to do that is to distract myself, and that can lead to other things. But I guess I see how that works. I mean, if I was sitting there worrying about something I can't do anything about, then it falls into the afflictive camp.
Right. And prevent us from doing some things that might be, more productive in terms of even, helping them. The thing to understand is, for me, is that I need to meet myself where I'm at. So, yeah, okay, shouldn't be concerned, but maybe a healthy distraction is already a step in the right direction, and not, not Gandhi yet, and so I'm not going to let it preoccupy my whole day. Maybe my distraction could be a more productive one. I'll notice just not so much with fear, but when my mind is like a little tired and I'm not able to do some of the maybe work that I was going to do, or like I'll do accounting work, which sounds like that's probably not. It's just QuickBooks. I'm just entering numbers. And so it's very straightforward. And so I'm just moving to a different activity that's not the one that, I would like to be doing. But I'm recognizing where my mind's at, and I think, well, at least this way I'm doing something productive. And it needs to get done anyway, but it's simpler for me to focus on. Likewise, a distraction, that we might perceive, you might have a distraction that's productive in some way. And rather than a mind that says, I shouldn't be worried, or I shouldn't be this, or, it's afflictive. It's like, okay, I'm feeling it. Given where I'm at, what's the healthiest thing to do next? Which it sounds like is what you're doing. So I'm trying to reaffirm what you're already doing. You're rocking it. That's a technical term. Okay, well, no other comments. We'll dabble a little bit. We're in that in-between state. I know we're not going to get through anger, but let's take a look at anger. Anger is really interesting. It's going to be very hard to find appropriate anger. And that's what they'll point out here. Or helpful anger in any way. I personally have not really found it to be, there's times where it can be helpful a little bit, but never that it could be more effective than something like compassion. Most of us would agree that in general, anger is a destructive emotion. Under its influence, we speak in ways that break the trust in relationships with people we care deeply about. Overwhelmed by anger, we act in ways that are dangerous and destructive to our own and others' well-being. While we often believe that our anger is justified, any sane person would be angry in this situation. So that's a very Western psychological view. Okay, and this is going to say something a bit different here. That doesn't alleviate the downside of anger. When we later calm down, we can see that our mind was exaggerating the negative qualities of a person or situation, or even projecting negative qualities that aren't there. How many times have you just been really frustrated, really angry, and just in a moment, somebody cut us off on a road, somebody, took something of ours, something insult us, and somebody just this rage or, frustration, or things didn't go, somebody had told us they'd do this, it didn't happen. And it was huge. And I said or did something. And can I even remember that today? It's just so exaggerated. Like, this is this huge thing. And we'll often say things that we're going to regret. That's one of the famous quotes that I use a lot, which I got off Facebook, so I know it's wisdom. It says, never make a decision when you're angry, or a promise when you're happy. Both extremes, right? Because I can be pretty bubbly about this, and maybe it's not the best idea. Let's chill, calm down a little bit before I make a deep promise or, major decision. So anger is really going to be something very, very tricky. Some people argue that some forms of anger are constructive. For example, if a student is wasting their time and not actualizing their potential, their teacher may become angry. This anger stems from the teacher's wish that a student succeed, and from that perspective, could be considered a positive form of anger, some people say. Now, it's like it could be a positive, then some people say. Some people say. Nevertheless, we need to examine each individual situation and check our motivation carefully. That's the very polite way of them saying, it's probably not so true. Each situation, let's check it and see what our motivation is. It is easy to justify abusive behavior by saying, I'm doing it for your own good. Yeah, that is sneaky stuff. Moral outrage at an injustice in the world is another form of anger that some people say is beneficial because it leads to constructive change in society, right? So that's a pretty good argument there. But here, too, we need to examine if exaggeration is present. And I love that now I know who's writing. So in this book, I don't know if it's the Dalai Lama. I don't know if it's Tubten Chodron. I don't know. But she says right here, it's her. Years ago, when Tubten Chodron, was at an anti-war protest, I saw another protester pick up a brick and throw it at the police. This action shocked me into realizing that his mental state had become like the mental state of those who were responsible for the war, right? The ranger, the brick. I mean, that's pretty serious. There was bias for his own side and animosity towards the other, warlike. He was protective of those who agreed with him, but sought to harm those who didn't. It is all too easy in a situation of conflict to forget that people on the other side are human beings who want happiness and freedom from suffering just as we do. Painting them as thoroughly evil and never to be trusted is definitely an exaggeration. So yeah, that's a great visual, right? Have a make love, not war thing as you're beating somebody with a stick. Rebecca. Yeah.
So I guess the way I think of try to examine my anger is, does my anger move me closer to resolving an issue?
Mm-hmm.
So every time my husband doesn't wipe off the counter, if I say to him, which I'm more likely than not to do, in an angry voice, can't you just wipe off the counter? It's not going to get him to do it.
Right.
It's in fact going to make him even more steadfast in his, it's not going to give him motivation to change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I look at anger. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example where anger I guess anger could be good if you were being threatened by a person. I have done a lot of work with sexual assault. So if you're jogging down the road and you are approached by someone who has ill intent, your anger would actually be effective in getting them to leave. So maybe that's one.
Yeah, so everybody online, we just had some very rich comments. I'm not sure if you got them all, but I think what you're doing is actually bringing up the very same sort of a very good method, right? Is it, when you're in anger, is it moving me towards some resolution in a way that's going to get the result, right? So yelling at your husband or having a tone, why don't you do it this way? Probably not so productive. And then, if I could present it in a different way, maybe we could be, right? Not out of anger. And then she went to this really, I think, important point. When could it be valuable, right? When can it be valuable? And so with anger, one of the things that happens in your example is somebody's attacking you or seeking harm in some way. Anger, the physiological response, your blood's going to go right out to your hands. You're going to focus. You're going to, remove the obstruction, right? So it could help you defend yourself, right? So that was a very good point. So in a violent situation, you could see a benefit. Fear is going to be a big part of that too, right? Out of fear, but in fear, I could be paralyzed, right? I can freeze. And so the sort of Paul Ekman theory would be that we genetically and just evolutionary, fear is a part of our survival mechanism to remove those obstacles. And so it would be like that example. So there could be a real beneficial outcome there. Now,
Is that anger though, or
anger, you could get really angry. When you're being attacked, you're moving from fear to maybe some things, but you might get into anger. If you could get in anger, you might be a little more productive. Mostly you're in fear. But if you could tinge it with a little bit of anger, you might be able to fight better. You get what I'm saying? Whereas a fear, you could respond maybe in a healthy way, just automatically, right? But you also might go into freezing a bit. Now, I've been in some of these situations, violent. I worked with gang kids and adolescents and had to break up fights. And it was interesting because I actually found that I could physically show up in a very powerful way with compassion. And I was a lot more productive, and I could grab someone. I could, literally throw my body to, defend someone, but not out of anger, which was, very difficult, obviously. But
you raise your voice, John?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't yell a lot, but harsh,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for example, I once, worked an adolescent facility with, a lot of gang kids, a lot of probation and youth. And we had norteños and serleños, different gangs there. And I came around the corner and, these kids are on top of one. And, and I just ran as hard as I could and threw my body to knock them off and to break that up and, physically get there and restrain. But I loved both kids, like the two that were on him and I loved them both, it wasn't, and I understood the culture they were raised in. I understood, and so it was interesting. I was able to do that. And what was kind of nice was my watch fell off. I had an expensive watch, and normally you would never see that watch again. But afterwards, one of the kids called me up and said, "Hey, Mr. Bruna, you dropped this, you know, getting my watch back. I was like, you know, because they knew we were looking out for them. And so that was quite nice. Now that's challenging to do. But again, we always need to start where we are. So there might be some times in our very human form where anger has a productive result. But when I was on an interfaith dialogue with you know, other religious traditions, you know, the question is this question: is anger necessary? My answer is no. My answer is no, not necessary. Everybody else was, yeah, it's necessary. They got a little angry over my response. And they got very adamant about defending anger and, you know, and how somebody, you know, robs this or beats somebody up and how, you know, and the audience got involved. And it was interesting because somebody brought up the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust. And at how, you know, again, in defense of a physical thing, how anger can be raised to, you know, to stop people from doing a Holocaust. And of course, that's a viable thing. Necessary is different and productive is different. Could it be? Yeah, it could be usable. But my answer to it is, couldn't you move to free those people out of compassion instead of anger? Right? I don't want people to suffer. I have found, and that was the mind I had with these kids. I didn't want to hurt them out of anger. I wanted to stop them from suffering. And the difference between compassion and anger, I had a lot more capacity in my mind with choice of what to do. With anger, I'm pretty narrow. You know, I'm very narrow. I don't see a lot, and I get blinded. And then, you know, when I taught high school in a rough, you know, high school, I was able to break up some fights without ever really doing much, you know, because they knew I was coming from a place of compassion. More often than not, they just kind of pick me up, Mr. Bruna, I don't want to hurt you, you know, and say aside, and I just dive in the way, you know. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Big Samoan kids, they just kind of pick you up and I jump in there, you know, and rather than being at them with anger. And so I think the distinction being here, whether it's necessary or not, can be irrelevant because it arises, right? Anger's going to arise. And the important thing is, you know, can I move it in a direction that's healthy? And most of the advice in Buddhist scripture, when you are in anger, again, not if you're being attacked, but you catch yourself in anger. The big thing is to, you know, take some breaths, right? That's Western culture. Take a breath, take a walk, let it subside. Buddhist texts will say you will destroy so much, you know, if you act on your anger in an unhealthy way. It's just such a dangerous place. That let's say I can't buy myself some time to ground, or I can't do that. Shantideva's advice is this: be like wood. Just still, just don't do anything. Be like wood. That is better than reacting in an unhealthy way. If I'm incapacitated, you know, like I'm just going to say, be like wood, you know, until it will go. So anger will come, anger will go. And if you're not in a life-threatening situation, there's going to be a lot more capacity for me to respond to anything in a healthier way if I don't come from anger, right? But you know what we'll do as Buddhists or just practitioners with big open hearts? We're going to get angry at ourselves for getting angry. Oh! So, not helpful. Not helpful. Then we're going to get angry at ourselves for reacting out of anger. You know, and then we get angry again. So it's really something to watch with our minds. That I had a friend of mine call me today, someone I work with a little bit, and he was taking his dog for a walk in the park, and somebody had a dog off the leash. It was a pit bull. It was a pretty, and his dog. Anyway, the guy wasn't close enough, wasn't paying that much attention. He's trying to call him over to get his dog, and anyway, got into a scuffle. And by the time the guy did get there, his dog had been bitten. He got a little bite, but he thinks it was from his own dog. It was pretty funny because he said, "I think it was friendly fire." Like in the scramble, his own dog got him, And but it was a big tussle. The guy did get the leash, but as he was trying to leash up his dog, my friend yelled some pretty, profane things. And when it all got settled, he was able to calm, and he did apologize for what he had said. And his dog actually needs some treatment. But the guy paid for it. It all worked out. Like everybody did the right thing. And the guy had it was the first time he'd taken his dog out of the yard. He had him in the yard for a bunch of years. First time he'd taken him out, he didn't know what he was going to do. Of course, my friend's thinking, yeah, so your dog's not socialized, so let's take him out without a leash. You can get that whole mind. But the thing is, when he described everything and how he ultimately handled it and apologized and developed a community, didn't report to police, let's just get, my dog fixed and all that. And the guy paid for it. And it was all fine. The guy was very apologetic. My friend was still needing to tell me that he had said these horrible things to the guy, right? The guilt of that. Even though he's already apologized, even though he didn't, and that's a trap I think we can get stuck in, is to beat ourselves up for things that actually, it's not that anger, it will arise. I will do some things. How do I respond beyond that? And he did such a great job, I thought. And that's why I kept reminding them. So we don't want to amplify anger by being angry at ourselves. As a matter of fact, if we can eliminate being angry at ourselves, period, for anything, you're going to be a lot more beneficial to everyone. And so one of the things that I do around guilt or shame or that type of mind is to recognize it's just another self-centeredness. When I'm angry at myself, it's all about me. And I'm not helping anyone. I'm just being selfish. And that makes me go, okay, well, then I can buck up and put that aside for the benefit of others instead of John's self-centered attitude. Yes?
You made me think of a keto training.
The keto training.
Which is a defensive martial art. And one of the things you did in the keto, when somebody was coming at you, you would help to disarm them so they didn't hurt themselves.
Mm.
Which I always thought was a really interesting philosophy. So you were taking them on and taking their energy and putting them on the ground so that they didn't hurt themselves. And that was sort of the part of the mental training that went with it. Mm-hmm. So you can hear that there's no anger or aggression in it. It's like we're trying to help you not hurt yourself.
It's compassion.
Yeah.
So for those of you online, Mark just shared that with a keto training, the view and the attitude and the motivation, if someone's attacking, is to disarm them so they don't hurt themselves. And that's use their energy in that way. And so you're going to be much more clear and able to have more ability to respond in different ways. So that's also a bodhisattva view. So a bodhisattva view will step in front of someone who might be harming or doing something because they don't want that person to cultivate the negative karma of such harmful actions. And so they'll have that same kind of view. I don't want to see that the pain that you're going to cause yourself. If it's not physical, even like emotional stuff, would approach, how can I disarm that emotional abusive behavior so that you don't incur that negative karma, and really come from a different place. Very similar. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so we are at the normal time where we kind of pause and get ready to wrap up. Do want to check in and see if anyone has any thoughts along these lines. We will pick up anger. I'm not afraid. Well, maybe we should be a little fearful of anger, right? Technically, a healthy fear of anger would be beneficial. Let us go ahead and dedicate the merit that we have had, that we have cultivated today and throughout our lives. I'll pop that up for those of you who would care to join me in that. Really? Okay, may come up again. All right, so just taking a moment to recognize the incredible compassion and kindness of all those who have helped give us the lives that we do and our time and energy here to live in a less afflictive state so that we can be of ultimate benefit to others. Let us dedicate. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha.